Hey dudes, it's Sunset, and this is our League Start Whisperer guide for the Legacy of Phrecia event.
That's right, I felt like I needed help with the intro because this isn't a yelling Ascendancy, and that's all I'm able to do. Alright, I am pretty sure I have found the build that I'm gonna League Start. Whisperer is looking like it might be the strongest Ascendancy in the upcoming event. Mana stackers are historically very strong, stat stackers also are historically very strong, Wanders have really amazing clear, and this kind of looks like an Ascendancy that could combine all three of those powers into one. There's just one problem with that. Getting up to that level, stat stacking, mana stacking, any sort of stacking isn't cheap. So that's a problem on day one of the league, but I've got a solution for that: Power Siphon Locus Mines. This build is going to absolutely shred on a day one budget, so let's just go ahead and get into it. Alright, so let's talk about Power Siphon and Locus Mines, because those are two skills with very serious downsides that are able to completely override each other, and that's why this build is so strong. So just to look at Power Siphon, it is a wand skill. It fires one projectile from your wand at nearby enemies, so if I take the Locus Mines out, and I walk up to enemies, and I right-click near them, it's going to shoot out one projectile each, and hit them. This is obviously terrible for single target damage, right? This is truly, truly awful for single target damage. We're able to get around that by using mines, but most mines have some sort of horrible downside to them, lessening your damage or just some sort of bad playstyle component to them. So the way that Locus Mines works is normally you throw out the Locus Mines, it does throw out 3 projectiles, but if they're hooked up to any sort of non-Power Siphon skill, the Locus Mines will only shoot back at you, and they have a minimum range. Like, if you're too close to the Locus Mines, they won't go off. So you have to set them down and then move away, and then there you go. So it's pretty hard to use. If I wanted to, kill an enemy that's over there, I'd have to throw the mines on the other side of them. Just an awful, awful skill by default. Power Siphon is overriding this, because Power Siphon just shoots at a nearby enemy regardless of that targeting behavior that you get out of Locus Mines. This is really good. This is why this is able to work so well. And in Settlers League, this has been played on a Trickster because Trickster's just a generically very strong Ascendancy. But there's some other stuff going on with the Whisperer Ascendancy that I think is really able to kind of push this to its limit. And some of that comes from the fork, which I have an Awakened Fork in my little 6-link here to kind of show off. We're just getting an absolutely insane amount of projectiles out of this. I'm also using, as you can see, return projectile support to get projectiles to return. If we take that off, we take both of those off, this is sort of how it would play normally. Like this. Pretty good. I mean, definitely not bad. But by being able to combine Awakened Fork as sort of a built-in bonus of the Whisperer Ascendancy, and then returning projectiles, we're able to get just insane amounts of clear, just truly insane amounts of clear, and actually still pretty decent little increase to single target damage over what had been the standard setup for a Locus Mine Power Siphon Trickster. So that's all good. So now I just kind of want to take a look at the Whisperer Ascendancy and show off the points here and kind of talk about Fork a little bit as well. We're able to combine Fork and Return to get this insane screen clear that I've shown in some of the clips so far. I mean, you can see, right? The screen's just flooded with projectiles. Jungroan would be proud. So starting with the Whisperer tree, Have You Forgotten gives you Fork on all of your projectiles, and it actually gives you Awakened Fork. If I tab back into the game here, I bought this Awakened Fork for a very overpriced amount. And as you can see, normally the way that regular Fork works is it kind of reduces your damage a bit, just like a lesser multiple projectiles or something, but then it lets your spells fork. So when a spell forks, if I pull up MS Paint, you're here, and you're shooting at some dudes up here, pack of dudes up here. Yeah. Normally, when you would shoot a projectile, if you shoot a projectile, it hits the enemy and forks, it then fires off at a 120-degree angle, like so, and then that's it. It'll never fork again, it'll just do all the rest of the behaviors that it would do, return projectile or whatever. But because of Awakened Fork, or I guess in this case, Have You Forgotten, that same mechanic, it's able to fork a second time. So it's able to split off into more projectiles. Maybe I played this MS Paint poorly, but the point is you're able to shoot one projectile, turn it into 2, and then turn each of those into 2 for 4. We're also getting, if I can pull up in the tree here, this chance for extra fork projectile from split shot, so we're able to get a 75% chance to create an additional projectile each time there's a fork, and there's 1 fork here, and then 2 forks up here. So there's 3 shots for an extra projectile, 75% chance. So we'll say that we get about 6 projectiles on average out of this. I think that's a reasonable average estimate. Editing Larold here, that's 6 projectiles per power siphon, and we're getting 3 power siphons per time we throw out mines, because we're throwing out 3 mines at a time. So that's 18 projectiles on average per right click, and we can right click multiple times a second. So we are truly just going to be flooding the screen with projectiles. There's also potential splitting from Sniper's Mark that I won't even go into, just, look at it. So I think this is probably what you're going to want to take as your first Ascendancy. It just gives you so much screen clear and makes it really easy when you combine returning projectiles to hit enemies with those returning projectiles. Now, returning projectiles, it's not going to be like a 500% damage increase to get 5 times more projectiles that come back. If a set of multiple simultaneously created projectiles returns, only one projectile in that set can collide with the same target. Projectiles after the first will pass through without dealing damage. So the way the return projectiles works, I have a very low level version of it here, but at level 20, it's think about 61% less damage with hits and ailments while returning. So it's about 39% more damage multiplier, which is still great. So that's the first part of this tree here. The second is just simply that this is a mine build, so getting more frenzy and power charges is very, very strong, and there is more gives you more frenzy and power charges like maximum. It increases both, and you're going to be increasing both throughout the tree, so that is also good. And then the next 2 nodes are really the thing that has got so many people super excited about this as like a stat stacker or mana stacker, and that would be Infinite Pursuit, giving you int no longer increases your mana, instead you get max mana out of dexterity. I think that's really amazing. You get a lot more. You get 1 max mana per dex as opposed to 1 max mana per 2 int, so you have this very strong incentive to stack dex, and there are some uniques we can use that'll take advantage of that. And then that turns into damage thanks to We Know All, which gives you attack skills have added lightning damage equal to 4% of your max mana, and that's not unreserved, that's just max mana. So you can still reserve a ton of mana and still be fine. And then 50% increased mana cost of skills, well, the mana cost of this skill is actually very low. I have put all of those bonuses into the config here. It's not expanding nicely, alright, let's fix that. Here we go. I put all of these bonuses into the config, the forking and the frenzy power charge maximums and the int and so on, and then also the bonuses from the small passives. And I mean, they're quite substantial, even with not really stacking dex very well. I have like a little bit of dex in this like level 98 setup, but with basically like what I would assume is like day 1, day 2 gear. I have come down here and taken utmost swiftness. That's like the one bit of dex stacking that I've really done in this setup, and the damage is still, looking pretty good, obviously, and like that's a pretty significant damage increase out of the We Know All bonus. Also, you'll note that the mana cost, even though the 50% increased mana cost of skills is coming in here, the mana cost just simply is not that high. We're able to get a lot more mana regen than we have mana expense, so as far as I can tell, I don't think Mana Flask will be necessary. I haven't needed it. I started like in Act 3 playing Power Siphon Mine setup and didn't feel like I needed to touch my Mana Flask after that point. So there's like good quality of life in this setup as well. Alright, so just to talk a little bit about leveling, I have put together some leveling trees as well. So the biggest concern I had with this was basically, how are you going to level through the first act, really? I've never started a Wander on a Ranger. I just never have. Never started with Kinetic Bolt or anything. But technically, you are able to buy Kinetic Bolt from Nessa, I believe her name is, if I remember right. Yeah, you're able to buy Kinetic Bolt from Nessa in Act 1. You don't get it as a quest reward, though. You do have to actually go buy it, but then you can just like hook that up to momentum and cold damage, and then after a little bit, you can drop momentum for Prismatic Burst, drop that for Sacred Wisps in Act 2, and that's pretty much it. I cleared on a 3-link. I cleared on a 3-link, and let me log onto that character real quick, but like, you could look at the gear that I had on this character. I never felt like I had any point where I was ever having any difficulty through the campaign. Like, this is the wand I was using. It's pretty bad. This also was the wand I was using. It's also very bad. Truly awful. And so this is the 3-link I was using: Kinetic Bolt, added cold damage, and Sacred Wisps. This is what I used for pretty much all of Act 2 and Act 3, and there really wasn't, like, it just was a very basic playstyle. I just walk around and right-click everything until it died. I had a pretty decent time of it. The only thing I would say that is maybe a concern is not really a nice way to say it, the ranger is too stupid to use wands. Her int is too low. So you're going to have to find int somewhere in the tree. Maybe like, I mean, the most obvious place to get it is Primal Spirit. You can get 20 int out of that. You can get int off of an amulet pretty easily. You might be able to just find a piece of gear or two that has some int. That is basically going to carry you on int for the first like 3, 4, 5 acts. If you needed to, you could come up and take like coordination or something. That's about the only other place I really see to get int. Ultimately, you could just take Thieves' Craft once you get over here, and that'll keep you set for int for the whole campaign. Other than that, it's just a pretty normal progression through the tree. I'm making my way over here and getting like Blood Drinker, and the accuracy mastery is really helpful since all of this is attack based. It is pretty valuable to have that accuracy. I also think that after you've picked up, I can't remember the name of this, I didn't see here, but yeah, Have You Forgotten, once you've got that fork, I think that getting more projectiles out of your fork is probably a pretty good idea out of split shot. Obviously, getting increased number of charges is good. Hypothetically speaking, you could take There Is More first and Have You Forgotten second, and that might give you a little bit more single target damage. Well, I mean, it definitely will. Either way could work pretty well. Otherwise, this is pretty much the standard progression through being a Power Siphon Locus Mind Trickster, except with obviously the tweak of going after dexterity and not really needing as much accuracy, since you are going to be dex stacking along the lines, along the end of the line there. But this is all like, you're not going to be level 98 on day 1 of the league, but this is basically how I would kind of play this out all the way to like level 98. Pretty basic, no cluster jewels or anything like that. I would definitely you can definitely put together a higher budget version of this, something that actually is spell suppression capped, or maybe even makes its way over to Mage Bane and takes that to get easily suppression capped. And then takes the evasion and energy shield mastery that uses evasion based off of your int to compensate, kind of overcome that downside of Mage Bane. That's a possibility, but I'm not really doing that for like day 1 stuff, just go with this setup as it is. I guess technically speaking, I must have dropped a point somewhere that says a level 97 setup. That's fine. So now just to cover the skill gems, they are super duper simple. Like I said, for the leveling aspect of things, I just started with Kinetic Bolt. You could absolutely just start with like Caustic Arrow for your first handful of levels until you're able to find a wand and get enough int to use a wand. You could never use Kinetic Bolt, that's fine too. You can also pick up Locus Mine. Locus Mine support will be available to you at like level 4 or something. You can put that and level it in your offhand if you want. Then I just used like Frostblink, and then I took Clarity, Vite, and Precision when I hit the level to take them. Herald of Ice and Thunder, use those through Act 2. Sniper's Mark, I used that as soon as it became available. And, I'm going to use that the whole time. I just have a higher level version of it set up down here. And then at level 31, you're basically able to move on to... it doesn't have to be level 31, it's whenever you complete the library, and you're able to buy Power Siphon and Charged Mines from Syosa. You're basically off to the races. And all you really need to make this setup work is this trifecta of the top 3 gems here, Power Siphon, Charge Mines, and Locust Mines. That is what I have set up on my Ranger here, just those 3 hooked together. Very basic, and I was clearing through everything, taking down Duresso and Calm, no problem. As for the other gems you could be going for, you can use flat added lightning damage. I think that is going to be the next best gem at a relatively comparable level. I think return projectiles, once you have that fork ascendancy, whether you're using it from the get-go, which I think I will be, or if you're waiting until your second ascendancy to take it, that's when you're going to want to hook in return projectiles. And then after that, I think your best option is added lightning damage and then volatility support, because you are doing a lot of lightning damage. Volatility support's just very good. Lightning Pin is not as good on an enemy that doesn't have like a ton of lightning res, but if you're doing a map where enemies do have a lot of res or whatever, then Lightning Pin could actually be better than Volatility, but both are good. Awakened Fork is actually bad. I just put it in here to talk about, to remind myself to talk about it and to say that Awakened Fork coming from the Ascendancy is very good. Adding another Awakened Fork on top of it to get even more projectiles, I think, is overkill, and obviously this is going to be a very expensive gem as well, so removing that, and there we go. Don't use Awakened Fork in this setup. I don't think it's necessary. Regular Fork I also don't think is necessary. Well, it won't do anything. You already have Fork built in. Then just for convenience sake, we're using detonate mines and automation support hooked up together. You don't have to have arcane cloak hooked up to automation support, and maybe that's actually a bad idea. Maybe that will cause mana problems. This is just something I had hooked up and cooked up here, but maybe you're going to actually want to take that out of the automation link and use it yourself, use it by hand. You'll kind of have to figure that out as you go. That is something I haven't really, can't play the Ascendancy yet, so I haven't really been able to truly play around with that and see how it goes. As for an Arcanist brand setup, I think a Tornado and Flame Wall and Punishment setup, since we're going to be, toward the end game, we're going to be taking Whispers of Doom, so getting the combination of Sniper's Mark and Punishment is going to be really good. And then Flame Wall just adds free damage. Tornado is like a damage reflection component, and having that hooked up to Arcanist brand, so it's dropping it on rare enemy. You throw the Arcanist brand on an enemy, and then those are all being dropped around the enemy, and then the power siphons are doing what they do. Great. Shield charge, this doesn't need to be level 16. It can be level 1 for cheapness and faster attack so that it's faster. Sniper's Mark is very good. Grace Wrath, Skitterbots, and Enlighten, pretty basic setup there. And then I have the setup here of Flame Dash and Precision, and you can use Arrogance to reserve some of your life, free up some mana to be used on the Arcane Cloak instead. That actually will give you a little bit more damage, but obviously it'll be reserving some life. So whether you want to do that or not is up to you. The same goes with hooking in a Clarity. If you're able to get a Clarity Watcher's Eye and you want to use that, that could work as well. It's really just up to you as to whether you feel comfortable reserving that life. It's a good bit of life being pulled away, so maybe you don't, but Precision and Flame Dash are definitely good. And the fact that this is a mana stacker, even though we're not really taking huge advantage of it, we're just still getting a lot of mana, so we're able to fit in a full level 20 Precision pretty easily while still having mana to reserve for our mines and mana to spend on Arcane Cloak, and that all works pretty well. And then that's pretty much it. You can use Enduring Cry and Urgent Orders to generate some endurance charges for something that I'll talk about in a little bit. And that can be pretty good too, but it's not necessarily required. You may not want to fit that in link-wise. You may be pressed and stressed considering that you're trying to fit in everything else around here. You may not actually be able to fit that in. My thinking would just be that you would have Flame Dash and Precision in one, not even two links, just separate links, and then you could maybe fit it Enduring Cry and Urgent Orders in some other links in that same item. So now here's the gear, very basic. I think all of this stuff is pretty achievable pretty quickly. In terms of what you're looking for a wand, since this is technically an attacker, this is a really good wand. It has flat, cold, and lightning damage. It has increased spell damage. That does translate over to the damage with attacks, since this is a wand skill. Power Siphon being pretty good. Increased crit chance, very, very valuable. The crit chance on wands is really high now, prophecy wands in particular, so increased crit chance, that'll get you pretty easily up to 100% with all the power charges we have. Crit multi is obviously very good. I didn't even realize that I was at 800% crit multi, but that's pretty dope. And then mind throwing speed is a crafted suffix, and if you're able to get that onto your wand, that is very good. If you want to use the rune crafting from the Settlers of Kalgur event, that can obviously be good too. Just, I think, increased spell damage seems like the most efficient, inexpensive craft you can put on a weapon to get a lot of damage. The shield, very basic, not really very good. Just some stats, some suppress, pretty basic stuff. Most of the rest of this gear is also kind of in that same camp. Two things here. I have Lightning Exposure and Intimidate on hit on the gloves. Those are obviously very good implicits. And then I have Wrath Effect, of course, just for more damage on the body armor. And then I also have Endurance Charges, gain an Endurance Charge every 14 seconds. And so we're able to take advantage of this by taking the Charge Mastery. I have the wrong one in here. 100% increased charge duration. And that's the only reason that we're able to take advantage of this. And it's not necessarily something you have to do, but getting 3 endurance charges, that is 12% damage reduction from both physical and elemental sources, elemental and physical damage reduction. So that's pretty great. And then maybe more toward the end of the weekend, you can add in an Arn's Anguish. You'll have to fix your resistances elsewhere. But an Arn's Anguish can add in brutal charges instead of endurance charges, which give you a pretty high chance to deal triple damage. And obviously that's a humongous damage increase. So you'd have to do some kind of adjustment around that with some of your other armor pieces. But that is definitely something you could fold in as well. Alternatively, you could just not use that body armor endurance charges every so often, and you can just drop that, and you can just say all right, instead of that, I'm just going to take increased damage per charge, not use endurance charges at all, and that's still like, it's pretty good. It's like 4% more damage from that mastery. It isn't bad. Now, in terms of the uniques that are in this build, Fractal Thoughts is a relatively common helm, and it just gives you like potentially a lot of crit multi if your dex is higher than your int, which it will be. And then if you are able to get your strength higher than your int, I don't really think that's going to be possible in this build. It would give you a pretty large dex increase, but that's going to be pretty difficult because your int requirements are pretty high and your strength requirements are not. So I don't think that's really achievable, but whatever. You still at least get some elemental damage per dex and some life per int, which is good as well. And then speaking of life from stat stacking, Garricon's Flight gives you life per 10 dex. It also just gives you some good stats, a massive amount of evasion, good bit of dex, some move speed. Immunity to burning ground is really nice. Shocked and chilled ground isn't as big of a deal, but burning ground immunity is pretty great. And then we have Maryland's Fallacy. So this is obviously a great neck for any build that is like overcapped on crit. It gives you a massive amount of crit multi. It does have that huge less critical chance downside on it, but that's okay because we have so much crit chance out of the combination of Prophecy Wand and Power Siphon giving a bunch of free extra crit chance and Power Charge stacking and so on that we're able to very easily still hit the crit cap while using a Maryland's Fallacy, so that's a ton of damage right there. Then the rings, the rings are basic. I'm using a Storm Shroud along with like an Abyssal Jewel that gives chance to avoid being shocked and a belt that gives chance to avoid being shocked. You can just find the jewel wherever, and then you can craft the belt with essences, and that gives you element immunity pretty easily. All of this is a very like budget setup, and that's okay, right? That is the point here. This is a budget setup that you would run for a while, use this to farm up very quickly, farm up like bosses and kind of blast through maps, actually, surprisingly, and be able to then afford to swap into something that is much, much stronger, that is some sort of a mana stacker or dex stacker or some other much stronger build. Maybe it's Mana Forged Arrows. Whatever it is, you would start with this and then transition into something stronger down the line once you'd farmed up enough currency to do so. Alright, editing Larold here again, and I just have two things I want to address before wrapping up, and those are, the defenses. Obviously, it's not going to be as tanky as a Trickster. Nothing is, and that's okay. This is like a soft core trade build. I don't care that it's less tanky. I still think that this character, the gear that I'm putting together for this like sample setup is very bad, and I think that this is roughly close enough to like a Toxic Rain Pathfinder day one start that I can live with that. Even if I am dying, even if I'm not literally living, I think that the damage difference is so much higher than Toxic Rain Pathfinder on a day one budget that this is going to work for me. The second thing to look at is actually more interesting, and that is like what Flesh and Flame nodes to consider stealing. I think Avidity is an interesting one since, that's just like a lot of extra damage. Focal Point's probably the best for your single target. Gathering Winds could be really good for movement. Obviously, that one's going to be super expensive, but I think Focal Point and Avidity could maybe be kind of cheapish by comparison. And then the other one that's just sort of interesting is Nature's Adrenaline. Trying to do kind of halfway between a Pathfinder and a Whisperer is just kind of interesting to me, especially with the possibility of adding in a Tides of Time belt and just really leaning in on Utility Flask uptime and giving yourself basically like kind of a budget Mage Blood situation by having the combo of Nature's Adrenaline and Tides of Time. There's maybe something there, maybe something to play around with as a way to really modify off of what this build is as it is right now, but something interesting for sure. Certainly would make the build faster. Alright, so I think I am starting this build. It's just too strong on a day one budget to ignore. I really wanted to stress test it by doing the like unascended Ranger through maybe like halfway through Act 4 just to see like is it even playable at all. And I was actually very surprised by how playable Wander was in the first act of the campaign. I actually think I had more fun with it than I usually do with Caustic Arrow. It was just a really good time. And then it was still pretty fun even up until switching over to Mines, and then once it switched over to Mines, it stopped being like this is actually surprisingly good to like just this is amazing. So unless something changes, I am going to be league starting this. I can't really see myself doing something else, even though I liked a lot of the other ideas quite a lot, and I thought for sure I was going to play Sparked Surfcaster since that build is so fast. Maybe I'll do that once I've like farmed enough currency to make it work as a full-on in-game power charge stacker. Alright, that's it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more like it, and if you want to support us even further, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching, and have fun with Power Siphon. Bye.